So last time we talked about why the American colonists were getting so angry at their own government, which remember was the British government, the King of England, and this group of guys named Parliament who helped him make some of the laws. And you remember there was a war in North America. It was called the French and Indian War. It was a war between England and France. They were fighting it to control North America. And England won this war, but it came at a huge financial cost. Wars cost a lot of money, and England needed cash ASAP. So the king and parliament thought, hey, well, let's get some money from the American colonists. We, after all, protected them against the French, and we helped them out on this, so they should pay for some of it. So the king and parliament passed some laws which taxed things like anything made with sugar, anything made with that sweet stuff that we all love, the Sugar Act it was called. The colonists had to pay some extra money in taxes. In addition to that, there was a law called the Stamp Act, which made the colonists pay some extra money on anything made out of paper. That would be newspapers, playing cards, legal documents. And needless to say, this made the colonists super angry. Now, on top of this, the king made his famous Proclamation of 1763, which put an imaginary line on the map which forbid colonists to move west over the Appalachian Mountains into the lands that they just won from France. The king didn't want the colonists getting into fights with Native Americans who lived out there. The last thing that he or Parliament wanted was another expensive war. It's also said that the king wanted control of that rich farmland and also control of things like the animal fur trading that was going on out there. And he was afraid that the colonists would become too independent if they moved out that way. Needless to say, this made the colonists angrier than ever, so they decided to do some things about it. They protested a lot against the king and against Parliament. They also did something like boycotting British goods. Boycott means when you refuse to buy something made by somebody else or by a business to hurt them financially. So they decided to refuse to buy British goods. They also did some things like petitioning. You've probably heard of that before. That's when you write a letter, in this case to the king or parliament, and you got a bunch of people to sign it saying, hey, please stop. We've got all these signatures saying this is all a bad idea. Well, none of this really worked. I mean, the king and parliament did take back some of these tax laws, but they just ended up replacing them with other things that made the colonists angry. And to top all this off, the king and parliament almost felt like Americans were disobedient children that they had to watch and take care of. So they sent a bunch of their British redcoats, their British soldiers, over to America. By 1770, there was almost like 10,000 of these soldiers in our towns and cities in America. And the people living in them, the Americans living in them, felt like they were almost like prisoners in their own towns and cities. And here's what I want you to remember most about all of this. Yes, the Americans were angry about the taxes and these laws, but more importantly, they were mad that they weren't allowed to vote for the guys who were in Parliament in England. The king and Parliament wouldn't let them do that. So, in other words, they had to listen to all these and follow all these rules, yet they didn't have a say in who was making them. They weren't allowed to vote in parliamentary elections like the people in England were. So they felt like their voices were not being represented. They felt like their voices were not being heard. And this is why the very popular phrase that I've said in class before, no taxation without representation, became so popular. In other words, they're saying, hey, you can't tax us unless you let us vote in parliamentary elections, which the king and parliament would never do. And all this trouble that was brewing was about to erupt soon. And next time we meet together, we're going to talk about an event that happened on a snowy March evening in Boston in 1770. You may have heard it before. It's called the Boston Massacre. And we'll learn more about that next time. Have a great day, everybody.